You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma Podcast. Mike Hearn here, host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today, but before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. So a huge shout out to Governor Anatobi for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my two pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my two golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. And the one thing that I do with the sponsors that I have is stuff that I use and recommend, like the Diffies with my car, Hall of Fame. They're awesome. Citizens Banks, where I bank. Chickasaw Nation, huge supporter of Oklahoma. And adding to that is the Doghouse. And so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too. But I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedoghouseokc.com and follow them on Instagram at thedoghouseokc. And hopefully our pups will run into each other. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, host, back with another episode down at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest, Mr. Ryan Watson. Thanks for coming down, mate. Thank
you so much for having me.
So, your story. Most people know you or will know you. If they Google your name, they'll see some things about traveling and, you know, some crazy stories about getting stuck in Turks and Caicos. But before we get to that, tell me about you. What's your kind of Oklahoma story? Where were you born and raised? And, you know, why Oklahoma, I guess?
Yeah. So grew up in Shawnee for the first portion of my young life. And then my father moved his ranch to Bowlegs, Oklahoma. So I ended up graduating high school from Seminole, Oklahoma. Okay. After, you know, we grew up on a ranch. You know, I got the very unique pleasure of being able to, you know, ride horses and hunt, fish, and just enjoy all aspects that type of lifestyle has to offer. And, but yeah, I mean, it was an awesome childhood. My mother and father divorced when I was younger, and so kind of had two separate lives, if you will. My mother lived in town, and so, you know, I would, you know, ride my BMX when I was at my mom's house, and then, you know, ride horses when I was at my dad's house. And so, but it was fun, man. Ended up going to OU, and, you know, wasn't really 100% sure of what I wanted to do there, but father and grandfather both were in chiropractics, and thought it might be something that followed in that in those footsteps, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah. Growing up, like, you know, with kind of like that dad side of the family on the ranch, you know, like, which is not easy work, right? It's very hard work to do, but also kind of riding horses. And did you ever think that, like, that would be a life for you outside of kind of, you mentioned kind of chiropractics was part of the family business. Do you think that, like, going into the rodeo side or going into the agricultural side, because agriculture in Oklahoma is a huge industry, was ever kind of like draw you in that way as a career versus kind of going kind of like quote your mom's route.
Right.
To
city. I would have loved if that could have come to fruition. Right. Like, my father was, before he was killed, he was kind of transitioning his focus from chiropractics to training horses. And that started to bear some fruit. He got involved later in his life. He kind of evolved from different Western, like in rodeo disciplines, into cutting horses. And if you know much about cutting horses, it's a very, very expensive hobby. Mm-hmm. I mean, these horses are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, right? And so, it either takes a large inheritance or a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there. And he was, paving his own way. He was just a natural at what he did. I wanted to emulate everything he did. I would have loved to have been able to follow in those footsteps. Unfortunately, his life was cut short. He was killed when I was 19. So
yeah. Do you? Sorry to hear that. I can't imagine having to go through that. 19 is such a. I mean, you're a young man, but still figuring life out, and the person you look up to is taken from you,
right?
With no real explanation, which is tough. Do you? The rodeo, the side of like the natural skill that he had to go cut horses. Do you share any of that natural ability, natural skills as far as like kind of learning, teaching? Can you pass that on to the kids that your kids and stuff like that?
Yeah,
because teaching's a real skill, and cutting horses is a mentally challenging thing to do.
Absolutely.
Right? Horses are very stubborn.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think that growing up, having the opportunity to watch him, I definitely think that I've inherited some of his natural horsemanship skills. Mm-hmm. I team roped, right? And, I didn't have after he was killed and that ranch was sold off and all that stuff because of just the situation at the time. Whenever I finally got on my feet and was able to, buy my own things, cutting horses weren't in the budget. So I was getting into team roping or back into team roping. And, I was good at it, but I was never good enough at it to make an actual living at it. Yeah. So it's kind of funny, though. Here recently, the rope horse market has actually shot through the roof. And so about a year ago, I sold off our horses because I'm spending most of my time in the bleachers, watching my kids play just, baseball and football and cheerleading and such. And so unfortunately, they had no interest in it whatsoever. No. Yeah. And so I was like, it doesn't make sense for us to have this at this point in time. I feel like a shell of the man I used to be, but I went ahead and sold everything off, and we were lucky in the regard that the rope horse market had taken off, and what we sold these horses for is wild compared to what I bought them for, and then also what we used to buy and sell horses for whenever I was growing up. I mean, the horse market's just blown up. I mean, it's a wildly expensive,
very
hobby.
Expensive hobby. Yeah, and it's I didn't grow up in that world at all. And in the UK, the horse kind of scene is very horse racing, and there's not very like the Western side of things where it's like calf roping and cutting horses. And I think anyway, it was always mostly race horses, and yes, those are expensive. Right, expensive. Absolutely. Everything is expensive about a racehorse. Even just like going to watch them was expensive. But yeah, that world and that competitive side of you and that work ethic that you have from growing up, on the ranch, the time that you weren't riding your BMX in the city, has clearly instilled that in you. So there's a lot of people that don't grow up that way, and so you're kind of blessed in a way to grow up like quote the Western way, right? And have that work ethic of getting your hands dirty.
I consider it a tremendous blessing, and when my wife and I had kids, a big checklist item for us was to have at least some bit of land or acreage that I could afford them a semblance of that upbringing that I was so blessed to have. So do you still ride? I know you sold the horses. Do you still find time to get out? And I still ride. I still have a handful of friends that compete, and so I'll go ride with them. I still have my horse trailer and all my saddles and the barn and everything.
Yeah. The dream's still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I just found like an extra hour in the week somewhere, I would go 100% go do it. I mean, it's therapy for me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a very patient person, but you cannot be impatient around a horse, right? And so I think that it's been such a, you know, cornerstone to my personal development that I know I'm going to have it back in my life at some point. But for right now,
you have different priorities.
Yeah.
Wife's gonna be mad at you if you're not, you know, one, you're not in the stands watching your kids, but two, you're off spending thousands of dollars a month on a horse,
right?
Just as a hobby and not making a career out of it. So, kind of back to you're in university. You know, your dad passes when you're 19. You're in at the University of Oklahoma. You said you didn't really have that much direction when you were in college, thinking about what you wanted to do, but was there a time when you were in college that had a mind shift, like, oh, I'm going to do this degree, and yes, I'm going to go do this, and this will be my career path?
Yeah, so it was shortly after my dad had passed, you know. My grandparents had set me down, and they were like, look, we set away some bit of money to help you with schooling, but we're going to kind of need to put put the accelerator to this a little bit. So I realized that I needed to find just a quick path to get a degree and get out and start hedging my way. And so I shifted a bit. I thought that I wanted to go in and do pharmaceutical sales. When I was in college, I did a ride along with the guy, and I thought, this guy gets a free car and a decent paycheck. Like, that sounds pretty cool to me.
Just goes and says hello to people all day, right?
Yeah. And so, that never panned out for me. Right after school, I ended up going to work for a liquor distribution company and was moved to I traveled all over the United States, and then they moved me to New Orleans right after Katrina. And it took like 6 weeks, and I was like, get me out of here. This is awful.
Not only does it smell down here,
yeah. So I guess it was probably 8 months that I was there, and then they ended up moving me to Texas. I ended up working for Red Bull. They were starting an activation called, goodness gracious, Red Bull Crossfighters, I think is what it was called. Okay. And it was a freestyle motocross event that they wanted to have a Western endemic feel to it. So they built like a replica of of Calgary's arena. And so they wanted, the fact that I grew up on a ranch somehow stuck out to them.
You.
And so they hired me. So I did sales and marketing for Red Bull for about 5 years. And then whenever my wife and I were, decided that we were going to get married, that wasn't going to be a lifestyle that was going to be too conducive to married life and family life. So I took a kind of a pay cut and took an apprentice role into medical device sales. And then 15 years later, here we are still doing med device. So.
How's the marketing budget for Red Bull? It's pretty big, right?
It was enormous.
What do you want to do? Whatever. You just figure it out. You got money to do it.
The dumber the idea, the more traction it got. Yeah. So, but goodness gracious, those people are, I'll tell you what, if you want a master's degree in thinking outside the box, it's a great career for somebody coming fresh out of college because goodness gracious, you're kind of given a blank check and
they've got it figured out.
Go churn.
The thing, all the stuff that Red Bull is involved in, they're never peddling their drink. No. Right? Never. It's just we do cool things. Yeah. And sure, you'll see the logo and you'll see a can in a store somewhere, but we're not going to tell you about the can. We're just going to go jump, Travis Pastrana jumping out of an airplane without his parachute, right? Or, jumping something crazy, or that the plane that flies through that tunnel. Red Bull as a marketing, engine has got it figured out.
My job was I sold to anywhere you would consume the product on the premises. So like the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, to Joe's Bar, right? And so I had all of North Texas. And the thing is you could not discount one can of Red Bull. It didn't matter how many millions of cans that this place sold. However, you could utilize the volume and you could offer them, but but basically their discount was then brought to them in a marketing budget, and then we would activate through marketing. Yeah. And so you would have to figure out, how can I help Joe's Bar market and create an event that's going to drive people in, help increase his top line, and then also, put Red Bull in a glowing light, so in a cool, environment. But it was fun. It was a cool little 5-year experiment, I guess.
What were some of your craziest activations or ideas that you thought would never see the light of day, but they pulled it off?
Man, the Red Bull Crossfighters was an amazing event. We ended up doing that 2 years in a row, and that was in the stockyards in Fort Worth. And so that was, a multi-million-dollar event. And it brought in, I don't know how many live spectators, I think 80,000 live spectators, and it was broadcast, internationally. When I left, about the time I left is when they got into really spending big money with the F1, and then it's whenever Felix Baumgartner had parachuted
out of space.
From space, so that's whenever it really seemed to kind of hit like a whole different level of but no, it was a fun career.
Yeah. So after that, then you said you and your wife were going to get married, and we're here 15 years later. How did you guys meet?
We met in a bar in Fort Worth, Texas. Okay. Both huge live music fans, and there was a guy that had gone to our high school, and he was playing live music, and we had some mutual friends that had introduced us. And it's funny, as we like to tell the stories. We met, we went on a date. It went terribly. She wanted nothing to do with me. And for 6 months, I was ghosted. And so, and probably rightfully so. She thought I was full of it. And then, golly, this is embarrassing. Can't believe I'm into this. But I had a roommate. You better get
the story right, because otherwise she's going to be giving you crap for it.
So my roommate's girlfriend had conspired with my mother that they would buy me a steak dinner and give me $100 gift certificate, or $100 bill, if I went and auditioned for The Bachelor.
Yeah.
And I was like,
sounds like a great bet for me. $100 for steak dinner.
So I was like, all right, I'll go. Yeah. So I go there, and I was a single guy, and I was like, oh, it's a place full of single people. Right. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? And I think I've got the world figured out. And about that time, this girl walks up to me, and she's like, hey, I'm friends with Valerie. I was like, oh, yeah, great. And next thing you know, my phone rings or vibrates, and it's my wife, or Valerie. She texts me, and she's like, hey, heard so-and-so just ran into you at the Bachelor audition. Things must be going great for you. Oh man, it was quite the low blow, but yeah, we kept the banter going. That's and good. Then I got her second first date. Did not take her to a fine dining restaurant like I completely like I did on the first one. We went and ate fried chicken and drank tall boys, and then we went and we rode my horse, and got us bucked off my horse. Oh, nice. I look like a complete idiot.
I know what I'm doing. This is great.
Yeah, but then somehow or another, she fell for me. So I don't know how, but
she's the real you, right?
She's way better looking than I am. So
that's on record as well. I love that. That's awesome. So she's from Fort Worth?
She's from Fort Worth. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And you convinced her to move to Oklahoma?
Oh, it was kicking and screaming. Yeah, bless her heart. So we moved in 19, and we needed to find a place that I was still rodeoing a little bit at the time, and needed to find a place that was conducive to horses. We couldn't find anything, so we decided to build. We were living with my mom at the time, so
with the kids too.
With the kids. Yeah. So we're living with my mom in her upstairs with the kids, and then COVID hits. Everything shut down, and I was like, I came home every day just expecting her to have her bags packed, like heading back to Texas, but thankfully she never did, and so she's awesome. She is by far and away way more popular than I am, because it 2 seconds for her to be, at work. And once she got into school, she, started her own tribe, and man, they are, she's got quite a huge network of people here now, and she's loving it. So, yeah.
So she's a teacher?
She's a teacher. Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. So she teaches at Oklahoma Christian.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah. And so you have 3 kids?
We have 2 kids. Our son is 9, and his name is Van Buren, and then our daughter Ellie is 7. So
that's awesome. Well, so you end up moving up. Sort of move up here in 19. You're kind of back home,
right?
For you, right? Your wife comes kicking and screaming. You're raising your family. I guess What are you in medical device sales? You go on from that apprenticeship to continue that, and you've been doing that for 15 years?
I had done medical device sales in a senior role down in Texas for about 8 years. I gave it up to pursue a passion project that made no money at it, and so
but you ticked it off the list.
Yeah, I ticked it off the list. And scratched the itch.
Most important.
And so I had. One of my competitors in the medical device industry had reached out to me and asked me to come backfill a role here in Oklahoma City. And so we moved up then. And yeah, I've been doing medical device sales. And then, like I said, my wife teaches at Oklahoma Christian.
Yeah. But the kids don't want anything to do with riding horses or getting into the...
Goodness gracious, I wish. So I've bought them 2 ponies. I've done everything.
Trying to force the issue as much as possible.
I've incentivized it as much as I can, and they just don't. For whatever reason, they just don't take to it. And hey, I want them to live their own lives, but it's funny every once in a while. PBR will be on TV, and next thing you know, my son goes in there and puts his boots and his hat on, and he comes out stomping around like he knows what he's doing. But no, I wish they, and who knows, maybe later in life.
They're still young too, right? There's time. I know at that age they're generally riding sheep and then something else.
Right.
Like it's, I've gotten to know a little bit about that world just through the PBR when it comes to town, and those guys are. I had a kid on the podcast whose family raised bucking bulls. That's all they do. And so he has been around that since he was, since he could crawl. And I said to him, why do you do this? And he's 20.
Right.
And he's like, I don't know anything else.
Yeah.
I don't know what normal life is like. I've been around them. I've been on sheep and all the rest of it. And this is, and he's part of the Oklahoma team, in the PBR stuff. I'm like, you weigh maybe 130 pounds,
right,
soaking wet, and this thing weighs, whatever it weighs, it's pissed off.
Right.
And you want to jump on the back of it for 8 seconds, you're crazy.
It's awesome. I love it.
But
it's so cool.
It is, isn't it? When you meet these people and you're like, you're the coolest people ever to be able to do that. It's it's modern day gladiator, right? Because these things can kill you, and they will kill you. And it's couple of the bullfighter guys on the 2 of them are from Oklahoma, Cody Webster and Nathan Harp. Nathan Harp's from Tuttle, Cody Webster's from Purcell, I think. And Nathan's been on the podcast too, and I'm like, why would you it's crazy to sit on the back of a bull, but to want to get its attention when someone's riding it, when it comes off to say, to be safety or cowboy protection, and and they're Nathan, I hadn't really met Cody that well, but Nathan they're big faith guys too, and it's just this is a God-given talent, and I know I'm doing the right sport. And still,
right.
just and you watch them do their job. It's like the bull moves in slow motion for them because they're predicting things and they know it, and everyone else is this is crazy.
This is out of control.
But when you're they have an element of control, which is fascinating to watch. And I didn't last long in the rough stock side of things, but in terms of taking horses that had never been ridden and getting them to a spot where my dad could take them and finish them and sell them for good money, for me it was knowing that there was control in a situation that seemed out of control, right? And there was to me there's something that once it happens the first time, you realize it's in your bloodstream and you're not getting rid of it, right? And it's something so cool and therapeutic, and
I mean, there's just a different level of connection
that itch
that happens.
As long as possible, right? Yeah, it's unless you get really hurt, which hopefully that never happens to anybody.
Right.
I think are they in Vegas at the moment? The teams, or last week maybe? I think the team. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Awesome, love it. Love to watch it. I'll be as far away from it as possible. Yeah, I would love to watch it. Those guys are awesome. Well, so leading into you going on, what was the reason then for you and your wife to go on vacation to Turks and Caicos?
We were celebrating my 40th birthday.
Okay, happy late birthday.
Yeah.
So, and why did you? I mean, why Turks and Caicos? Are you like a big beach guy versus?
No.
It's your wife wanting to go to Turks and Caicos?
No. What's funny is, so I had two fraternity brothers.
Okay.
A guy named Trey Marler and Tanner Dyer. They were both Lambda Chi's with me at OU, and we had our 40th birthday. Like, I think we were all within 2 weeks. We all turned 40, and so we had conspired for a while to get together and go somewhere for our 40th. My wife and I wanted nothing to do with like Turks and Caicos. Like, it just sounded boring, to be honest with you. Well, we love to travel, but like we like adventure and we like doing stuff, right? So we tried feverishly to talk them into Costa Rica. It was a place we've been to quite a few times and love, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And so finally we're like, all right, we've got to concede. 2-1, right? Well, let's just, in order to get this trip going, really the whole purpose of it is to go celebrate with them. So we'll go to Turks and Caicos. And so we decided that we would go to Turks and Caicos. What's crazy about it, whenever you look at like the timeline of our story, is we start planning this trip in like late January, early February. And I went back and looked the other day when I was kind of making an outline of everything, and like the day that we book our VRBO, which is like February 13th, is the day that Brian Hagerich was arrested.
Oh, wow.
So Brian Hagerich was the gentleman from Pennsylvania that was arrested. And so, we're excited. We're, getting ready to embark on this trip.
Were you aware that he was
no clue at all.
Yeah.
Right? So none of this is public knowledge, right? Because the TCI government was doing a really good job of keeping everything suppressed. And so, we start booking and planning our trip. Well, Brian's arrested February 13th. 2 days later, Michael Grimm, the gentleman from Indiana, was released from prison. So we have no idea that any of this is going on. We fly out April 7th. All of our birthdays were in March, but because of kid activities, we couldn't make it until the first week of April.
Did you go with adults only, or take the kids with you?
Adults only, yeah. So we fly out April 7th, and we have a good time. We definitely made the most of it. We did the e-foil boards, and we rented a boat and went out and had a great time. We'd saved up for a while to.
It's not a cheap place to go.
No, not at all. Yeah. And it's not a cheap place to stay for 75 days either. So, we lived it up and we had a great time. But on April the 12th, whenever we go to leave, we were going back through security. My wife and I and all the couples had applied for a fast pass to get through the security line. And so it was something that was recommended by somebody that had been there prior to. They're like, hey, that airport's hectic.
Like their version of TSA pre-check or whatever?
Yeah, essentially. And it was like, basically you just walk up, hand a slip of paper to this guy, and he cuts you through the security line. And so we get through security, but there's, it's backed up like crazy. The people are upset that we're cutting through the line. And so because of that, people are kind of shuffling in line and such, and we all get separated. So we all come through at different times. I make it through, and I end up in walking across the hall, and I'm sitting in a duty-free shop, and there's a glass across the front, and I'm sitting there watching, and I noticed my wife is Val's standing at the security line. I was like, what's she waiting? She looks like she's waiting on something. Yeah. I walk up to her, and I was like, hey, what are they doing? She's like, oh, they're going through the duffel bag. And I was like, okay, don't think anything of it. So you're both on the same side at this point. She's both, So she's through the security line, but we're just waiting on the bag to come through. And I don't think anything of it because we had put her makeup bag in that bag.
Right.
So I'm like, oh, she's got lotion or something in there. And they start tearing through this bag, and they're like feverishly looking through this bag. And I'm like, we're all joking, right? Like, if somebody ever like went back and found like we're not taking this seriously whatsoever, right? And it's the thing that people do whenever somebody's bag's going to get,
especially in a big group,
getting
giving
torn
each other
through.
crap.
Yeah,
Like,
it's what are they going to find in there, right? And everybody's getting ribbed for it. And so we're all laughing and joking around. Well, they take all the contents out of the bag. They're looking through it, and then they run all the contents through. Then they run the bag through. They pull the bag back out, and then they start ripping through the bag. I didn't know this, and this is something that was reported in the media that was wrong. Was that the media always said that the ammunition that was found was in a pocket. It was not in a pocket. I've got a picture of it. I'm glad to show you.
Yeah.
That the lining of that bag zips out.
Yes.
And I'd never zipped the lining out of a bag in my life, and never knew that it was in there. And so the lining of that bag had unzipped. In fact, I think the zipper itself had started coming apart, and that's essentially where the bullet fell down in between the bag. And so, lady pulls it out. It was like the original package. So it was reloaded ammunition. It was ammunition that I hunt here with, and there was like a little baggie.
Like a 7.62 round?
It's a 6.5 Creedmoor.
Yeah.
And she pulls it out. We don't see it at the time. She kind of keeps it close to her vest, and she turns around and walks off. And Val was like, "What was that?" And I was like, "I have no idea. Like, did you see what it was?" And she's like, "It looked like the little keys that are in the bag." And I was like, "Huh." Like sometimes there's a bag, some like the locks and little gold keys. So we just thought, oh, they're gonna, we just thought that they had found the lock out of the bag or something, and so we don't think anything of it.
Right. You're still giving each other crap.
Yeah. They come back over, and then the lady like holds it up in front of both of our faces, and I immediately recognize it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my goodness. But it still doesn't make sense to me, because I'm like, how in the world?
How do we get in?
Yeah. I'm like,
how do you get through U.S. to fly to the local?
Exactly. Like none of this is making sense.
Right.
And I'm like, that is I recognize it, right? And I could see the little stamp. I bought it from Village Tactical on May Avenue. Like I could still see this like little sticker on the side of it. And I was like, oh goodness gracious. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like that's my bad. Like you can just throw them away. Yeah. And she was
Which
like,
is what they would have done with a knife or blade, whatever's accidentally left in there anyway, right? Or a bottle of water or whatever, right?
And so I was, I'm not thinking it's a big deal. I've never made this type of mistake, but I've tons of friends that hunt all over the world, and they've done something similar, and they're like, it just gets tossed in the trash. So I'm like, my apologies. And the lady doesn't really say much to me. She's like, hey, hang tight. She walks over. And the first like strange thing was her and the other lady, like they turn and they take a selfie with it in front of like the X-ray monitor that they're watching. I was like, that's a little strange, it's a little.
Yeah, it's not like it's a drug bust. Right, exactly. like police officers and their dogs are taking a photo with like $1 million worth of drugs right here.
Yeah. So Val's, she's panicked, and I'm telling her there's no reason to be panicked. Like we're going to be fine. And so a guy walks up to us and he's like, hey, you Americans do this all the time. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And he was like, it's not going to be that big of a deal. He was like, you just have to talk to our police officers. I'm like, all right, cool. Guy walks up in plain clothes. We were probably there for 20 minutes, like waiting. This guy walks up in plain clothes, like T-shirt and jeans on. And he like walks over and he grabs my passport. And he looks at my ticket and he's like, I just want you to know you're not making that flight. I was like, okay.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, man.
Sure.
So I turned to the couple that we're with, and I was like, hey, you guys go on, like, and they were trying to stay. And, bless their hearts, they were trying to help, but there was like, there's nothing you can do. I was like, you guys go on, we'll figure this out. We'll be on the next flight. We walk. So he escorts us out of the airport, and we're sitting on the side of the road, and out of nowhere, here comes this like beat up old like silver Nissan SUV, and we're like, what in the world? Two other turn out to be police officers get out, plain clothes, like there's nothing, like there's no badges, no nothing. And we're sitting there and we're like, this is a little strange. They come up and they start, the questioning gets pretty serious.
Pretty
pretty
good
quick.
English? They speak English?
Pretty good English.
Okay.
There's a Caribbean accent to it, right? But for the most part, it's a man and a woman, but they've not addressed themselves, and it seems pretty sketchy, right? Like there is nothing that says police anywhere, right? And so we're kind of freaking out a little bit at this point, because I'm now thinking, are these some nefarious individuals that are trying to
paid off TSA or whatever, and just hey, when you have someone, we'll take care of them. Here's $1,000.
So I don't know if I need to start pleading for mercy or start trying to beat people up, right? And I'm like, I got to protect my wife here. And so lo and behold, a marked police car pulls up, and we're like, okay, this is possibly going to get serious. There's a brief exchange. We don't really understand what they say back to one another, and the people in the police car get back in the car and they speed off. And I was like, uh-oh. Oh boy. I was like, that there was our one kind of redeeming sense of that legitimacy, that this is an actual police officer that we're dealing with. And they were like, hey, we're taking you to our station, get in. And I was like, I need to see a badge or something.
Just you, or taking both of you?
Taking both of us, my wife and I. And so they kind of shake their head. They grab the bag, which is funny because they handed me the bag with the bullets in it, right? As if it was. It's funny to hear that they thought of me as such a threat, but yet here I was
here's ammunition. Off you go.
And so we take the bag, we throw it back in the car, we get back going. They take us to a white unmarked building. It had NEX US on the side of it. It was Nexus. I don't know. It was seeming a business down there. Take us to a second story. We walk in, and it looks like an office building, but there is a poster on the wall that makes it seem okay, this might be some form of police task force of some sort. We get in there, and they put us in an interrogation room. Both my wife and I, still sitting there with the bag with the 4 bullets in it.
And do you have your other bags? They've given you those?
No, we don't. Those are still at the airport. Yeah. Which is, it turns out, that's what the people in the marked car went to go get, was our bags off the plane. And so we were interrogated for hours. I don't know how long we were in there for.
Asking all sorts of questions. What's your intention?
Yeah, what's your intent? Yeah. Who were you doing business with down here? And I was like, I'm here for my 40th birthday. What are you talking about?
Trying to get you to say something.
They were really trying their damnedest to get us to say something incriminating. And I was like, look, I recognize that ammunition as ammunition that I buy for hunting. I had no intention of ever having it on me. I deeply apologize for the mistake, but this isn't that big of a deal, right? Come on. And I was like, look, I need to call my mom. She's got our kids. I was like, I need to let her know that we're not going to be able to make it home in time. And that's whenever the officer kind of scoffs, and he was like, you don't get it. He's like, both of you just don't get it. He was like, you're not going home. And we were like, what? And he's like, no, you're both going to prison for 12 years.
So that's when they officially told you this is a really big deal. You're going to prison, and at this point you're just thinking, I'm waiting for a slap on the wrist. This has been a whole big misunderstanding. Yeah. Congratulations, you scared us. Now put me back on a plane.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
And he's like, no, he's like, you're going to jail or to prison for 12 years. And Valerie starts crying. I'm still not convinced that this isn't an intimidation tactic. Right. And because it seems asinine, right? 12 years for inadvertently having ammunition in your possession. I was like, this is...
You've also been there for however long already.
Yeah. And so I'm like, man, this seems crazy, right? We can't be going to jail for 12 years. So we start pushing back and forth, and, they're walking in and out of the room. They're leaving Val and I there. We've snuck they didn't take our phones from us. So anytime they walked out of the room, we'd both pull our phones out and we're like texting people feverishly, like, hey, now we're in big trouble. Like, we need help.
Yeah.
Val being at OCS, we didn't realize it at the time, but it ended up being such a blessing because, she got in contact with her principal and was like, hey, I just need to let you know something's going on. Might be here for longer than we anticipated. And so her principal ended up getting in touch with Governor Stitt, because Governor Stitt's kids go to Oklahoma Christian, and then Senator Mullen has a nephew that was going to Oklahoma Christian. So we had people getting in touch with Governor Stitt and Senator Mullen within like hours of us having been detained. And so we come back in, or they come back into the room, and the guy says, you know what? He was like, we're going to end up taking both of you guys to jail tonight. This is the thing. And so Valor starts crying, and she, stops for a second. She's like, neither one of us have ever been in jail or in trouble of any kind. Like, she's like, am I going to be cold? And I'll never forget, like as a husband, man, like, somebody that's sworn to care for and protect her, it set something off inside of me. And I was like, nope. And I kind of sat up in my chair, and I was like, guys, I don't care what has to happen here. Like, something is going to change right now. And I was like, she's not going to jail. End of story. And they kind of, fought back a little bit, and then they ended up walking out of the room. They come back in, they say, we're going to make you a deal. And I was like, okay, great. They're about to come in and ask me for money, which I'm like, great.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. And so he says, you're still going to jail. He said, but given that it's the weekend, because it's a Friday, he's like, given that it's the weekend, he said, we'll offer you police bail. And basically it means that you get to go to a hotel for the weekend, but you have to come back on Monday and give a recorded interrogation. And we'll likely see about pressing charges then. But we're going to give you all the weekend to kind of get your affairs in order and figure out your kids. We're like, okay, how do we
48 hours.
How do we do that, right? Do I pay you? What do I do? And he said, no. He said, we're going to make you put up surety. I was like, what surety? I've never heard this before in my life, right? And so he says, well, you need to find a local that has an asset, the equivalent of your bail, and that local has to put up that asset for your bail. And I was like, I'm a tourist, dude. How in the world am I going to find somebody? So I'm texting my friends. The driver that had been driving us around, bless his soul, man, he ended up putting up his car as our surety. He came and put up his car as our surety, and allowed for Valerie and I to get out that weekend. And so we had to book a hotel. We had to give them the address, the room number, the whole bit. They could come in at any time and check that we were there and that we weren't doing anything nefarious.
What was the value of the car that he had?
$10,000. And I don't
significant amount of money.
I don't know if that car was truly worth $10,000.
Right.
Bless his heart, the sweetest man of all time. But he was doing everything he could to keep that car running.
Gosh.
So, so he came and put up his car. Luckily, they let him keep it. He just had to hand over the title. So he drove us to our hotel and dropped us off and was like, "Good luck, guys. Do a lot of praying," And so we got on the phone and started making phone calls left and right. We got in touch with the State Department. We got in touch with the U.S. Embassy, who we thought was going to be our knight in shining armor in this whole thing, and turns out it was far from the truth.
Yeah.
But
they just don't have the jurisdiction that you wish they had down there. Because most people would do that. You're in a different country. You're like, oh, U.S. Embassy. Boom.
Right.
Let's call those people.
Yeah. Yeah, man. No, so they actually, in the end, they ended up working against us in a lot of ways.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so, I didn't see it at the time, it was somebody that was willing to help.
Yeah.
They helped put us in touch with the gentleman that we hired as our attorney. I knew I needed to hire an attorney, a local person. It had to be.
Yeah.
And so we get all that set up. We're making arrangements. My mom and stepfather, they're like, we're flying there right now. So we make arrangements for my in-laws to come up and watch my kids. And Val and I start calling everybody we can, just saying, hey, if you know of anybody that could have any influence or do anything to help us in our situation, we'd be forever indebted, right? And so we, there's lots of phone calls, no food, no sleep. I don't think either one of us ate or slept that entire weekend.
Just because you didn't have an appetite?
Man, I was sick to my stomach,
Right.
And so, but the craziest thing is that next day, my father-in-law sends out a text message to our family in North Fort Worth. And he's like, hey, Ryan and Valerie are in a situation. They need your prayer. Her cousin was training to be a firefighter, and his training had gotten moved to a different fire station. And so he's on break. He pulls out his phone, and he's like, oh, my goodness. He said, my cousin and her husband just got arrested in Turks and Caicos. If this ain't God, I don't know what is.
Right.
The guy sitting next to him turns. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, no, why? And he says, my best friend is Michael Grimm, and he literally just got out of prison for the exact same thing in Turks and Caicos. Let me put you guys in touch with him. And so in 48 hours, we have Michael Grimm's phone number, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and I've never met him before.
Never met this guy, right?
Just,
I mean, this is 100% divine intervention, right? And so my father-in-law calls us Sunday night, and he's had he was the first one to have a conversation with Michael Grimm, and I could hear it. And his name's Chris. I could hear it in Chris's voice, and he was scared, right? And he said, Ryan, I've had a long conversation with Michael. I think you guys need to talk to him. And he's like, it's going to be hard to hear. Yeah. And I was like,
how long was he kind of held for?
He was in prison for 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he was the first American to be sent to prison. So I tell Valerie, I said, look, I've got it in my mind that we're going to go. I'm going to give my interrogation. I'm going to say my bag, my bullets, even though it was the bag that she was technically taking through at the time. My bag, my bullets, right? And I was like, the goal is home, you go home, right? Yeah. And so we go in that next Monday. We show up at 10 a.m. as we were ordered to do on our bail sheet, and no officers anywhere, right? We sit there and we wait and we wait and we wait. We're like, goodness gracious, what's going on? I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, I've got it in my mind. I'm going to jail. Put me in jail, right? And we sit there till just before 3 p.m. We're there like right before 10 a.m.
Did you see anybody?
So we see locals, right? Yeah. Like locals coming in and out. The crazy thing is we started getting our first blush of like how crooked things were, because in order to report a traffic accident, these locals would have to come in and pay the police officer $30 in cash and then write the report down in a notebook. Yeah. And then it was up to that police officer whether or not he was going to take that out of that notebook and go put it in. And so we sat and watched this. I mean, it was just a revolving door of these things and reporting petty theft and crime, but they'd have to pay cash in order to report it. And I was like, this is scary, right? Yeah. And so about right before 3, the two officers that had arrested us pull up. They come, they take Valerie and I. My parents are with us at the time. And so they won't let them. So Ruben, our driver, had to come pick them up and transport them back to this original building that we were interrogated in. They take us in. They take me back first, and they put me in the room, which was our plan, that we had come up with the attorney, that I was going to go in there and go on tape and just say, my bag, my bullets, right? And they're in there fumbling around, trying to get things set up. It was odd because these officers seemed more nervous than I was. I just was like, something's off, about this. So we're setting up, and it was a tiny 8x8 room, and the officer, his name's Sergeant Charles, gets a phone call, And he answers, or he declines it the first time, then he answers it the second time, and he's like, hello, like he's, bothered.
Yeah.
And he answers it on speakerphone, and the person on the other end of the line says, hey, we got you another one. And I like kind of tilt my head, I'm not clued in, and it says, and he's like, what? And he said, yeah, we got you another one. It's a mid-20s Caucasian girl. She's got 2 live rounds in her carry-on suitcase. And about that time, he goes to grab his phone. He starts shuffling, trying to, he's got a big belly, and he's like trying to get up out of the desk.
Yeah.
And I was like, did I just hear what I think I heard? Like, and like, I can still hear the phone call. Like, I can still hear like Sergeant Charles stumbling out of the room. He walks out of the room. He yells at 2 officers, and seemingly they take off to go pick up this girl. So I'm distracted during my entire interrogation because this is all I can think about is this phone call. But I do what I'm supposed to do. I tell him my bag, my bullets. My wife had nothing to do with it.
And your attorney is local to Turks and Caicos?
He's a local Turks and Caicos guy.
Okay.
So I walk out. I go sit at the desk. We're like literally sitting at these officers' desks with like evidence bags everywhere. Like, it's wild. Like, I was like, at one point I was like, I need to like see if I can find the evidence bag with my bullets in it, just like dispose of it, right? But I'm sitting there like, as they've got Valerie in the room interrogating her, and next thing I know, the door swings open, and here they come dragging this young sandy blonde girl, mid-20s. Yeah. I didn't get a great look at her face because she was crying hysterically and her hands were covering her face. They were dragging in her carry-on suitcase and clear bag with 2 bullets in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this girl is now in our nightmare too.
Right.
So Valerie finishes up her interrogation. Our attorney shows up at the last minute, and he goes in, speaks with the officers. They come out, and he's like, hey, you know what? They say they haven't made up their mind whether or not they're going to charge Valerie. I said, what are you talking about? I just went on camera and told them, like, it was my bag, my bullets. Like, she has nothing to do with this. And so they were like, yeah, they said that they need another week to make up their mind. And I'm like, they're just playing with us now, So they extend our bail, and they send us back on our way. We get, we're walking to the car, and I tell Valerie, I was like, and my parents, I'm like, we're not talking about this in front of if anybody, like something bigger is going on here. Like, and so we make it back to the hotel that we were in. All 4 of us are crammed in this little hotel because we're trying to save money. We don't know what's about to come. And Valerie has gotten a text, and it was the principal that had been in touch with Senator Mullen, and the thing was saying, hey, what's crazy is the embassy had never been contacted by the police officers there. In fact, it was Senator Mullen's office, whenever they reached out for the first time on Friday, it was the first person to ever notify the embassy, which the officers had told us otherwise. And so I was like, something's for sure going on. I was like, all right, let's call Michael. So that night we call Michael. He is at dinner with his family. He gets up and walks away from dinner, and he's like, no, my family knows that this is the call I need to make. So we sat and talked to him for probably 4 hours, and he was like, this is what prison's like. This is the politics of the island. This is why this is going on. And he kind of helped explain it to us. And I was like, okay, what are my options? And he was like, you have no options, dude.
Zero.
And I was like, well, the embassy, they say they're going to help us. And he's like, I'm going to forward you an email. He said, this email is from a lady named Usha Pitts. And Usha Pitts is the charged affair of the embassy. The embassy was run out of Nassau. And he said it was basically an email to my mother telling her to get lost and to lose her email and never email her again whenever she was tracking on my whereabouts while I was in prison. He was like, they have none of your interest at heart. I was like, okay. And I was like, what about the media? I was like, and he said, it's something I wish I would have done. He said, I was told it was a death sentence. And he's like, I'm sure you've been told the same thing. I was like, I was. They told us, our attorney told us.
Like if you go online, stop posting about it. Yeah.
They're like, you'll get killed when you end up in prison. Yeah. And so I said, I think that we need to do this. I think we need to go to the media. And he was like, it's a bold move, dude. He's like, that's something that you guys got to pray about. He's
and
like,
you're not only putting yourself in harm's way, but you're putting Valerie in harm's way too,
100%, right?
And then also your parents are there as they point too. So like, this is just like, you can't just like die on the cross and be like, this is me. I'm taking this. It's my fault. Like, I'll do it.
So he says, but there's somebody you have to talk to before you do this, dude. He's like, you've got to talk to Brian Hagerich. He's the guy from Pennsylvania. Like, and he's going to be in court before you will. Like, you guys need to figure this out together.
He's still there.
So he's on the island, right? So I was like, okay. So I get his number. We call him that night. And I was like, called him late at night, woke him up. And I was like, hey, dude, I was just arrested for this. And he's like, I've heard. He had heard from one of the prison guards that he had made friends with. And I was like, I want you to come to dinner with us tomorrow, or I'm going to bring you over here. And, we're going to talk about this. And so...
Take a sip. Well, we got time. Yeah, you take a sip. We got time.
So, Val and I prayed about it that night. And, as we were praying, one of my buddies that I grew up with in Shawnee, his sister-in-law was the head news anchor at NBC Boston. And she had reached out and was like, if you guys need anything, don't hesitate to call. And so we called her and we were like, okay, what do you think about this? And she's like, Ryan, this isn't like, she's like, this is above my head.
Yeah. She
was like, but I can for sure put you in touch with the right people. And we were like, okay. So so Tuesday we bring Brian over for dinner. We go pick him up. We bring him over to our house.
And they let you take him out of jail?
So he was actually on bail at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was staying in a pretty rough area on the island. The island's actually really dangerous.
Yeah.
And so so we go pick him up. We bring him to the house, we had to move into a VRBO at this point. We bring him over and we cook dinner and we sit down and I'm like, look, I don't know what option you've weighed yet, but here's our plan. We'd like to go to the media. And he shakes his head no. And he's like, nope, I've heard it's a death sentence. And I was like, I've been told that too multiple times. I was like, but I don't see another way out of this. I was like, they are really going after 12 years. And he said, yeah, I agree. And he looked at plan B options of different mercenary type people that were willing to come try, and none of it seemed legitimate. It all seemed like a lot of money.
And in the movies, right? Like, hey, give someone $100,000 and they'll show up like Rambo. And
it was more than $100,000.
Well, I'm sure it was. Yeah, pull you out of there. Yeah.
And none of it was legitimate. None of it seemed legitimate, right?
It's stuff you hear about in books and movies, right? Of like ex-teams guys that are like, now we're contracting, or you watch the A-Team or whatever. Yeah.
And so I was like, look, we could, if we did that, we'd live in the dark. We have families, right? I was like, if this worked our way, and it's a huge if, right? Like, we would need a higher power to step in on our behalf to give this the breath that it needs. I was like, but if we did, we could potentially go back home and have a parade welcome as opposed to in the dark of the night welcome. And I was like, which do you want to live with your family with the rest of your life? So a couple drinks later, he finally agreed, and he was like, all right, let's do it. So we all put our hands in the center of the coffee table that night. We prayed, and we said, all right, we're doing this. Wednesday, we set up our first interview. We set up interviews with NBC and CBS.
This is 5 days later from the previous Friday when you tried to fly home.
Okay. So we're 5 days in.
Yeah.
And we set up our first interviews. We make all the media sign embargoes that they cannot release the story until Valerie is on a plane. Yeah. Because her safety was paramount, right? Yeah. And our attorney said, under strict orders, he's like, I think it's a dumb idea for you guys to go to the media. He was like, but you cannot go and tell Valerie's off the island. So we said, okay. So we embargo those stories. We interview with NBC and CBS, and we tell them we got to go back on Monday the 22nd. I'm likely going to be arrested, and hopefully, with if all goes to plan, Valerie gets released and she goes home. And at which point she'll lift the embargo. If Valerie went to jail, my mother had the right to lift the embargo. And so we go through that weekend. Tyler Winrick from Virginia ends up getting arrested, which doesn't become news until after I was arrested, or I was officially charged. So we go in on the 22nd. They take Valerie back. They don't say anything to us. She comes out. She's emotional, but she won't look at me. Didn't know at the time why. They take me back. They say, you're going to be charged. You're going to prison for 12 years. It's okay. And so they stand up, put me in handcuffs.
And you're asking, what about Valerie at this point? Trying to figure
They won't
out.
tell me anything, right?
They didn't tell you anything.
And they said, when you walk out of here, they were like, it will be worse on you if you look or say anything to your wife.
So that's why she didn't.
That's why she didn't look at me. And so they pushed me out of the building. I still turn and tell her I love her, and and so they take me off, put me in a cop car, and take me to the jail that I was supposed to be in was overrun with Haitians at the time. And so they took me to kind of what's known as like the tourist jail. And I was put in a cell. It's one hole about this big, no lights, right? Like I've never been in jail in my life. But so that was Monday the 22nd. Valerie gets her passport back after they were trying to do a bunch of nonsensical stuff and mess around with her. She gets on the plane and lifts the embargo. The story breaks that night.
Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is brought to you by the Doghouse OKC. Recently, I have been in need of some doggy daycare for my two pups, and the Doghouse have come in clutch. The team over there are incredible. They've taken care of my two golden doodles, and so it's been an honor to partner with them on the podcast and share the love. And the one thing that I do with the sponsors that I have is stuff that I use and recommend, like the Diffies with my car, Hall of Fame. They're awesome. Citizens Banks, where I bank. Chickasaw Nation, huge supporter of Oklahoma. And adding to that is the Doghouse. And so if you're in need of doggy daycare in the day or boarding overnight, they do grooming and other cool things too. But I've had a fantastic experience, and it's an honor and a privilege to share this with you too. So go to thedogHouseOKC.com and follow them on Instagram at thedogHouseOKC. And hopefully our pups will run into each other.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.